War in Ukraine effectively ends any debate on the Second Amendment, and I'll tell you why. So, I was reading timcast.com, and they're talking about how Ukraine has supplied 18,000 weapons to their citizens. And these aren't like American sporting rifles, these are fully automatic AKs. And the anti-gun leftists celebrate their efforts. I mean, it says it all in the title. And if we read down here, you know, President Zelensky tweeted out that we will give weapons to anyone who wants to defend their country. And he said this in an English announcement on Twitter. Now, for years, the anti-gun leftists have talked about, oh, well, there's no reason you need a military-grade weapon. Even sporting rifles are useless against a modern army. Well, that's not true, and Russia's finding that out the hard way. Now, in America, we've always assumed that the reason we've never been invaded, nobody even thinks about invading us, is because we're so heavily armed. Back in World War II, Yamamoto said that if the Japanese invaded America, they would find a rifle behind every blade of grass. And that was true. And there's more privately owned guns now than there were back 70 years ago. Now, what's happening in Ukraine, everybody assumes, well, against a modern army, you need missiles and airplanes and all kinds of cool stuff. And a regular citizen with a rifle couldn't do anything. Well, that's not so true. So what's happening in Ukraine is very interesting. Putin's sending in his tanks. You know, the Russian tanks are rolling in, and the Ukrainian civilians and the Ukrainian military, for the most part, you know, the military's fighting as best they can, but these civilian militia groups are hiding. They're just waiting. They let the tanks roll on past. They don't mess with them, because the left is right. A sporting rifle will not do any good against a tank. But after the tanks roll through, you've got supply trucks, and supply trucks are not armored. And these citizen militias are hitting the supply trucks and taking them out. You know, they're shooting them up. They're stealing the supplies, and it's causing Russia a big problem. And the Russian army's already limited on their supplies. Putin can't. Putin needs a fast victory. He can't sustain a long-term engagement. And yet these lightly armed civilian militias are doing tremendous amounts of damage to the Russian logistics, because the Russians, you know, the armored vehicles can't be everywhere at once. And this is just proof that, you know, a regular person with a rifle, you get enough people together and they can be somewhat effective against unarmored logistics vehicles. And there's also reports of massive quantities of Molotov cocktails. You know, a common tactic in these kinds of engagements is you'll see civilians, you know, 20, 30, 50 of them all run up to a vehicle and just shower it with Molotov cocktails. And at that point, even if it's an armored vehicle, you overheat the engine. It's going to be in some trouble. But what we're watching unfold in Ukraine, Ukraine's having some problems in that when they give out all these weapons to untrained civilians, there's cases of accidental friendly fire and people not knowing how to use their weapons. There's a funny video of a news conference where a recently conscripted civilian turned soldier accidentally drops the magazine out of his AK because he doesn't know what he's doing. And so it's funny to watch, but this is what happens when you arm the population last minute. But in America, where we have a Second Amendment, and anybody who is responsible and owns a weapon is going to practice with it at least enough where they know how to safely handle their firearm. And that would prevent a lot of these, you know, these accidents that Ukraine's having to kind of learn through on the fly. But it's conclusive at this point that lightly armed civilians can wreak havoc on even a modern military's logistics. And it's the same with the American military. We've got the most powerful military in the world, and most of our logistics vehicles are unarmored also. We found that out the hard way in Afghanistan, where we had to up-armor Humvees because we were getting our Humvees shot up. You know, look at the case in Somalia 20 years ago, maybe almost 30 years ago now, where the Somalis were shooting up our Humvees. And so, you know, some of our Humvees are now up-armored, but our supply trucks are still just regular supply trucks. You know, they're big, beefy, tough supply trucks. but it's not bulletproof glass. It's not bulletproof steel. Light arms fire will go right through it. And like I said, the Russians are finding this out the hard way. So this basically ends any debate on the Second Amendment. And obviously the anti-gun left agrees, because they're celebrating giving untrained civilians fully automatic weapons. So I think it's just a matter of time before we get our fully automatic weapons here, right? I'm worried about the Russians. I want my fully automatic. No, honestly, I think I like my semi-auto just fine. But this basically puts an end to that argument. So the next time somebody tells you, "Oh, you don't need your sporting rifle, you don't need your 30-round magazine," tell them they're full of it, because we now have modern video evidence in a modern war, and Russia's a modern army. They're not pussies. They're a serious army, and they're running into a hell of a lot of trouble in Ukraine because of untrained civilians. Imagine what trained civilians who actually go to the gun range and practice with their weapons would do to a modern army's logistics. And what's going to happen if Russia can't wrap this up in the next few days? Their tanks are going to run out of gas. Their soldiers are going to run out of ammo if they can't get their supplies to the front line, because a bunch of untrained civilians are screwing with their supply trucks. Their whole offensive is going to fall apart. Anyway, so if you like what I'm doing, please share the video with your friends, subscribe to my channel, and that really helps. So thank you very much, and remember, practice with your weapons so you don't accidentally drop the magazine out on international television. And good night.